Welcome to the Cyber Call, the podcast by Ride of Boom for managed service providers looking to stay ahead in an ever-changing world of cybersecurity. Each week, we dive into the latest threats, trends, and real-world strategies to help MSPs protect their clients and grow their businesses. Let's build a safer, stronger community together.
Welcome, everybody, to a special Cyber Call edition here on Thursday afternoon. And coming to you here from Tampa, Florida, with some awesome guests and co-hosts. I'll lay out all of our co-hosts and guests momentarily. Just a quick programming note. Jacob Horn will be here. He's going to be a few minutes late. Scott Edwards my co-host, may have to leave a few minutes early. So just anecdotally, Let's kick things off a little bit, and I'll get into the intros just for a moment. A lot's happened since Monday, as we all know. That's why you're here joining us, and I appreciate you all coming in. I want to share one web page to set the stage. Do a little bit of banter, buy a touch of time for Jacob to join us. But we know what happened on, and I'm going to just jump over here, bear with me. We know what happened on Monday. But, as I was looking at kind of some research after talking to, some folks like Jacob and you all here on the call, I wanted to kind of get a kind of a sense of, oh, and by the way, the soothsayer on the call, Andy Sauer, who kind of said about a month and a half ago, the one thing that might derail this could be the current CIO. Andy, I'll give you credit for that. But I wanted to go back even a little further, and in looking at this meeting with the House Armed Services Committee back in March, Scott, I'll put this URL in chat, but it seems like I'm reading through this, and as you read through that out there, once I share this all with you, it's like they're the kind of like, well, wait a minute, isn't this going to be really expensive? And will we have the assessors? And we're limiting businesses being able to get into the defense industrial base. Correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't CMMC a validation of what they were supposed to be doing all along? And did everybody have amnesia in this meeting? Like, yeah. Get us on the fairway here.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right, Andrew. I mean, every time I hear many officials talk, both from DOW as well as people outside of the administration, there's a lot of confusion about where cost is actually coming from. And it all gets blamed on quote unquote CMMC, when in actuality, about 90% of the costs that contractors are incurring is to get into compliance with DFAR 7012 and NIST 80171, which has been in play and in contract since 2015, 2016, right? And so, the cost of the actual assessment is not that crazy. It's about, on average, $40,000 to $50,000 every 3 years. So you're looking at somewhere in the range of $15,000, $17,000 a year annualized over a 3-year period. So the cost of CMMC is pretty controlled. The cost of implementation, though, is going to be highly variable and depend on, how large of an organization you are, how you have built out your infrastructure up to this point. Some companies have to start from scratch. Others have done a pretty decent job of getting ready beforehand. So there's a lot of variable costs there. And when you hear officials saying it costs $500,000 to get, CMMC, that's just not accurate. It's just simply not accurate. And that is a real, I think that's a real millstone around the neck of CMMC, if you will, from a public perception standpoint.
Got it. Ryan, you had a few things you wanted to say. I know right before we got started on this article as well. Can you give us any kind of thoughts you might have as well?
Yeah, I think overall, this change that we're all witnessing right now, suspending this effort to Scott's point, it's definitely misattribution of where the costs are coming from. So if the primary argument you're going to make is that this specific element of the phase 2 rollout is cost prohibitive, that doesn't really like add up when you look at least where we've seen organizations had to have spent their money. It also feels like, whatever consensus is behind these actions, like those individuals maybe aren't a student of history, in the sense that like these questions have largely been asked and answered over and over and over again. Every National Defense Authorization Act in which the defense budget is passed asks these questions and gets answers to these questions. Every DoD Inspector General report on these topics, even before CMMC, but just how well is the 800-171 project going for contractors, has been pretty egregious at the shortfalls in organizations' ability to implement. And then just the fact that we keep seeing the expansion of the DOJ Cyber Civil Fraud Initiative shows that like all signs point to the fact that the implementations are not as complete as they should be, and that the costs related to that part of it are what's driving a lot of the barriers and things to that effect. So it just, we hear phrases like the math doesn't math. Well, like the motivators don't add up either, which is what are we really seeing here? Are we seeing the long-term effects of organizations not having implemented at all? Yeah. And I think that's really what is the root cause behind a lot of this.
For sure. Scott, all the rulemaking, it was open for people's public comment. I mean, there was a lot that went into finally, getting there, so to speak, getting it over the goal line. And, again, when I saw this article, did these people not understand what's been going?
Yeah, I think that is.
Oh, I was going to go, Scott Singer. I was going to go.
Oh, okay.
No, you're going to have to, there's too many.
Yeah, I have to do.
There's never too many Scotts.
Yeah.
Anyways, yes, I mean, I do think that there's a little bit of amnesia here, obviously. And I think it's we're getting closer to that, the reality of this, people are getting louder, especially in that small, medium-sized businesses, right? And that's those constituent voices are loud, and that's what they're listening to in a lot of respects. So, and again, kind of to Ryan's point, to use this excuse to clean up the technology debt that's been out there for years and years and years. I mean, I actually think it's a good thing, right? Because we're replacing all these old switches, these old routers, old operating systems. There's a lot of really good work that's been going on to increase, our defenses here. So anyway, those are my thoughts.
Yeah. So, Andy, let's go to your final thought on this with a question linked in.
Sure.
So why they suspend CMMC if it's a non-issue? I think they came to the understanding that a lot of companies were simply not going to pursue government contracts due to associated costs. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, overall, my thoughts are I think this is the first shot in what's going to be I'm going to go off my hot take here, guys. So we're going to go right into it. I don't think they're attacking CMMC, the certification construct. They're attacking the standard. All indicators that I'm seeing, that I think if we kind of see their criticisms and what is in the RFI, they're looking at a takedown of the whole 800-171 as the back standard. The first couple questions in the RFI are not about assessment costs. They're asking which of these controls cost you the most? What is the most burden? Which security controls are actually useful to your cybersecurity? And then they've included in some of their messaging this last week this link to the Brilliant Basics campaign that they've launched, which is a top 10 cyber essentials-esque sort of thing. The signal that I'm reading out of that is they had a problem with phase 2 specifically. I think this is the first exposure that they can the first foothold they can get in a larger campaign to shift things in a different direction wholesale.
So Scott, I have just a question to you on this, because I put the brilliant for basics. You beat me to the point, Andy. This is one of those ones I want to rip out my hair. I'm like, you look at brilliant for the basics. I don't know about you, Scott, but I don't know too many manufacturers that are going to be able to implement even brilliant at the basics. I mean, your thoughts on either that or what you were going to say?
Sure. No, I so much to say. I will try and control the thread here. But looking at the brilliant at the basics, and Andy, I think I agree with you on that. I think that is exactly right. I think it's entirely wrong-headed, but I think you're exactly right. That being said, if you look at the brilliant at the basics, 10 points, if you will, only 3 of those, I think it's 3, maybe 4, only 3 or 4 of them actually harken back to controls that are actually in 171. The other 6 to 7 of them, depending on which that is, they are completely new requirements, right? And, DOD tried that before. We had this thing called CMMC 1.0, where we had 800-171 as a baseline, and then we added the Delta 20 to it. And that included things like backup, which are part of the brilliant at the basics. That included, other things that went beyond 171, and DOD got their hand slapped pretty hard. And it took 3 or 4 years, and here we are back to 800-171 as a baseline. Not only that, but you look at what's coming down the road with the FAR CUI rule. The FAR CUI rule is going to go, we've got a proposed rule out there now. We expect that the FAR CUI rule is going to go final within the next, say, 90 to 120 days, most likely. And built into the FAR CUI rule in Part 140, which talks about, is the FAR CUI rule for the FAR overhaul, it specifically references 800-171 Revision 3. Well, if you look at contract law, the FAR takes precedence over DFARs. So once the FAR CUI rule is in place, the DOD cannot go beyond that baseline standard. They cannot go lower than that baseline standard, right? So they have to apply at a minimum 800-171 R3 to all of their contracts. DOD can't go in and say, okay, we're not doing 171, we're doing brilliant at the basics now. Now, they can do all the brilliant at the basics things in addition to 171 R3, right? But they can't get rid of 171 because it's built into the superior contract law. And so I don't know what they're planning to do there, unless they're planning on going and completely pulling out the FAR CUI Rule 2, which they are a party under the, with the FAR Council, with NASA and GSA. But I don't know. I don't know that they have that kind of pull. I don't know.
I think your point is they can't do it legally.
Kind of a possibility. I mean, like, if you think about, an organization that just doesn't want to continue to be blamed for costs, the perfect crime would be to let the FAR CUI rule waltz in and really take the hit for all the requirements that need to be in place.
And one of the things that I've been saying, and Jacob, welcome to the session.
Perfect.
There you are. And Jacob actually said this before I said it, so I'm going to give him full credit on this one. But if you want to remove costs from CMMC, the program, you get rid of CMMC level 1, right? 2/3 of the cost in CMMC by rule is CMMC level 1 because of the cost of doing self-assessments and everything that goes along with that. So if DOD wants to remove costs from the CMMC program, obviously that doesn't address implementation costs that DFAR 7012 brought in. But if you want to reduce CMMC costs, you get rid of CMMC level 1, let FAR 21 handle that, the 15 controls there, and DOD doesn't have to claim it.
Yeah. So let's do this. Now we have the crew here. Jacob, are you just very still, or did he freeze? But let's see if hopefully he can.
He's just that stoic.
Yeah, he is. There you go, Jacob. You're back. Yep. All right. So let's do some quick intros and let's get right on into this for time's sake. Thanks for that banter. This is going to be spirited, I can tell. So, Scott Singer, let me kick it off with you, and then I'll go around and I'm going to let Scott Edwards kick off the first few questions. So, Scott, welcome.
Great. Thanks for having me. I was CEO, founder of Cyber9s, got acquired by Control Case, and now the president of the Federal Division of Control Case. And yeah, that's me.
Thanks for your 30 years of service in the Navy. Much appreciated. So Scott Edwards, thanks for your service in the Army and all you do with the MSP Collective and lobbying for this good group of MSPs. So welcome. Tell us a little about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Scott Edwards, CEO, founder at Summit 7. We have been doing nothing but talking about all of these fun topics for the last decade. So this is what we do. We've been riding this roller coaster for a long time.
There. Ryan Bonner, welcome.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ryan Bonner. I'm the CEO of DefCert. Got into this space back in 2016, doing work with the NIST MEP programs. Been doing a lot of work lately, helping people figure out what the heck CUI actually is in their context. And pretty much DFAR cyber compliance all day long.
Yeah, cool. Andy, welcome.
Yep, Andy, CEO Sentinel Blue. Like Scott, have been living in this chaos for 8 years since DFAR 7012 went live. And this is just, to me, this is regression to the norm. We had some normalcy, we had some stability for the last year, but chaos reigned supreme, and we're right back at it.
Oh, for sure. Jacob, thank you for your service in the Navy as well. Welcome, and a little bit about yourself, sir.
Yeah, well, these days I'm basically just the CMMC lore keeper because the leadership teams have changed multiple times over the years who are supposed to steward this program, and it seems like they don't always read all the history behind why the program is the way it is. So my job these days is to try to gently remind people that have you guys ever heard of the story of Chesterton's fence? Like when you come across a fence in a field, you shouldn't just tear it down until you know why it was there. It's basically what I do all day is being like, there's a reason that fence was there and you really shouldn't take that down just yet.
Does that make you the dungeon master, Jacob?
I mean, at this point, yeah, basically. It's like,
A new title is in order, Scott.
Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous because it's like, we can get into it, but I mean, it feels like every few weeks I'm like, hey, person who just got a new job at the DoD, did you know that we talked about all this back in 2018? No? Okay, well, I'll wait for the dust to settle and then send you an email.
Yeah. Well, to that point, why don't we get started with, kind of an honest read, right? On the scale of a routine, review by a new CIO to, Armageddon for this program, kind of where do you see this at this moment? Scott, why don't we start with you?
It is a big deal. Okay. I know it came out as a memo, and we need to see a little bit more documentation on this going forward to make it real. But it's a big deal. And some of the things that concerned me was pointing to, as we talked about brilliant at the basics, that's a whole different kind of framework, right? And so that was concerning to me. That kind of telegraphs a different direction. And people have already spent a lot of money and a lot of work to get to where they're at, right? And so throwing out something different scares me a little bit. Saying phase 3 and 4 is paused, that was a concern to me too. So I'll stop there.
All right, Ryan, what are your thoughts?
For me, I'm just waiting to see what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object, because you've really got existing rulemaking that is very, very difficult to modify and walk back on. It's not very malleable, right? And the DOW CIO can't cancel NIST special pubs. They also can't readily walk back on some of the other programmatic elements that are already in place, like the CUI program. So how big of a dent do they end up making? And if they don't get the carve outs and the dents that they want, do we just end up with even more stuff stacked on our plate that we have to do, like our new brilliance?
Yeah. Andy, what do you think?
Yeah, I think foolish is anyone who dances on CMMC's grave this week. I don't think that's the case, but foolish too is anyone who thinks this is a mild delay and a normal sort of thing. I think there are some high stakes involved here, and I'm preparing for just about anything because I don't think there's anything we can predict. And I think all we can do is read smoke signals and do what we can with that.
Right. Jacob?
Yeah, well, I think that the current CIO, the current Undersecretary for Acquisition and Sustainment, and the current person in charge of the SBA stepped right on the rake and are now about to get hit directly in the face with the handle of the rake, because the program was designed to reward people who comply with what's in their contracts and then not give work to people who are not complying with their contracts. Everybody wants as many companies to be participating in the DIB as possible. But rather than extending phase one and do some pretty easy policy changes to gradually bring all of those non-compliant companies into the fold, they suspended the one mechanism that Congress told them to do and then gave a bunch of reasons for doing it that are demonstrably false. So they're blaming the wrong thing for what the program was designed to affect. And as a result, like Andy said, it's going to be chaotic because they're going to have to walk their statements back, issue different policy changes than what they said before. And all that's going to do is confuse people when they should have just done that to begin with.
So to that specific point, and this is something that I know you've actually spent a lot of time thinking about over the last couple months, but, the CIO said that, quote, the math just doesn't math, and was talking specifically about the assessor capacity and blaming, the pause, if you will, on lack of assessors in the ecosystem. Can you tell us a little bit about if that, what do you think about that statement?
Yeah, it's not true.
And by the way, I'm going to put your LinkedIn, which has the data actually in it for those that want to actually do the math. Go ahead, Jacob.
And Jacob's paused. Are we back, Jacob? There we are. Yeah. We're back.
We touched a nerve. They cut the feed.
So tell us. You say it's not true. Give us the numbers. What?
Yeah. So originally, in the first 12 months of the rollout of the program, DoD anticipated that they would get about 517 level 2 certifications. At no point in time in the history of this program did the government ever say that everyone who would possibly need a level 2 cert needed to achieve a level 2 cert by the end of the first year or the end of the second year or even the end of the third year. In the first month of this rollout, we had 575 level 2 certifications. So we had more level 2 certifications in the first month than the DoD originally thought they would get in the first year. And every month since then, even under the most conservative analysis of total assessment capacity based off the total number of possible assessment teams, the total capacity for the ecosystem dramatically outpaces the rate at which companies have been able to demonstrate that they can pass those assessments. What's happened is that contractor readiness lags way, way, way behind the ability for the ecosystem to scale to support the contractors who are ready. That has been true every month for the phased rollout. And based off the growth statistics, we were going to end up with enough assessment capacity to meet the maximum number of assessments per year that the DoD estimated long before the maximum number of contractors were going to be able to be ready for an assessment. So when the DoD CIO comes out and says there aren't enough assessors, the ecosystem isn't scaling, we won't be able to assess enough contractors, it's straight up not true. It's not true based off the publicly reported data each month. And through the grapevine, apparently there is a report from the Cyber AB that was provided to the DoD pretty recently that said a bunch of C3PAOs have a bunch of open, unscheduled assessment slots between now and the end of the year on top of the ones that were already booked. So then the DoD CIO comes out and says there's not enough assessment capacity. I don't know what math she's checking, but you're right. The math isn't mathing according to her numbers. According to the numbers that everyone else is looking at, the math looks just fine.
And Jake, just one thing, Scott. Jacob, you and I chatted, correct me if I'm wrong. Let's just say the math was the math. There's provisions for that, aren't there, as well? You were sharing that, gosh forbid we hit that wall of capability.
Yeah, by regulation, if a program in the DoD says we cannot get enough certified contractors to support this effort, you issue a waiver. Remember, CMMC 1.0 overreacted to the United States getting absolutely spanked by Chinese espionage. And they said, no waivers, no POAMs, no exceptions, no nothing. Everybody go get a cert right now. We don't want to hear it. After the last program review, they said, yeah, we can do waivers, we can do POAMs. So if there isn't enough assessment capacity and there aren't enough certified contractors, which is not what the data says, where are all the waiver requests? How many waivers have been asked for? How many waivers have been granted? Because that seems to have never, ever happened. So I'm not sure what they're talking about.
Yeah. And to that point, the strangest part of this memo, in my opinion, was the fact that the ability to do waivers was removed from the program through this memo. And so,
because there's no waivers for self-assessment.
Can you? Right. Well, yeah, right. So the ability for waivers was removed. And so, Scott, can you unpack kind of the announcement as a whole and give us kind of the high level points of, what all was included in that, including the waiver removal?
Sure. So the Phase II requirement for CMMC Level 2 C3PAO third-party assessments and Level 3 DIBCAC assessments to be included in contracts after November 10th, that's been paused for 60 days. So that's kind of was the main point line of the memo, right? So the Level 1 self-assessments and the Level 2 self-assessments will go into effect. And as Jacob kind of pointed out, right, you need to get a score of 88 or better of specific controls, right, to be able to even post your score in SPURS, right? It won't even let you post it if you don't get there. Mm-hmm. And as we're going to talk about later, right, is that if you do go ahead and post a perfect score in there and you're not there, it's false claims, right? So, yeah, and there's no waiver to that, right? It's just Level 1 and Level 2 is self or going into effect in November 10th. So, yeah, it's a big deal. All Phase 1 requirements stay in effect. Okay, so C3PAOs can still do voluntary Level 2 assessments. And Phase 3 and 4 is suspended for the next 60 days too, but that's sort of irrelevant, right? Because that's years out. So DFARS 7012 is still in effect. It's technically been in effect all the way back to 2013. 2017, right, is when NIST SB 800-171 came into effect. So that's kind of the lay of the land at the moment. 60-day pause. Self-assessments are now required in the next 2 months.
So Andy, if these have been, CMMC L2, C3PAO assessments have been suspended, pulling it out of solicitations, pulling out even out of existing contracts. If you have, clients that are going through, have one scheduled or going through assessment, like you said, you had one that you was finishing up,
literally the day before.
Yeah. So what are you telling your clients, and what are they telling you about, kind of their path forward right now?
Yeah. We haven't settled on where to take things. So Sentinel Blue sits on both sides of the house. We're MSP. We're also a C3PAO. So we're doing the certifications and we're defending customers through the certification process. So far, we've told everyone, let's not overreact. Let's not make an emotional decision. Let's keep on keeping on. The scenario Scott mentioned, before we started was we had a customer start their assessment on this Tuesday. We were in our final prep call when we got the email saying Phase 2 has been paused. So we're very much in the thick of it. And immediately had to say, well, does this change anything about proceeding into tomorrow? Ultimately, we didn't. And for those who have a short-term plan to get an assessment, we're telling them to, keep on keeping on. But I want to go back to what I see as the signal and really go back to some of what we've been talking about that Jacob was bringing up. I think pointing out that the math that they're introducing is disingenuous. They will concede that at some point and say, like, you guys are right. So what? That was 10% of the cost. Their real challenge is the cost of implementation. I think that's, again, I think this is the opening criticism of a broader campaign where they're going to say, to your point, Scott, that was 10%. Thanks for pointing out that that 10% was actually not as bad as we thought. But the 90% implementation cost, we still see as too high, too burdensome. And that's probably the feedback they've been getting. A lot of the criticism about CMMC is wrongly attributing issues with implementation cost to the CMMC certification model. And I think that's their actual issue.
Scott, I know it's my shout.
Right or wrong, I should say. I'm not saying that's correct. I'm just saying.
And Andy, to your point, it's like how much justification do you have to create for yourself to trim stuff out of the current requirements before you just say, we actually don't want to safeguard this data?
Yeah, for sure. Jacob, you were gonna. I got a sense you wanted to say something there. If you want to just let it rip for a second before I.
Well, yeah. I mean, how many times have you guys heard me say, and other people say relentlessly, the CMMC verification program is not the underlying requirements, right? So the CMMC verification program was designed to plug a hole at congressional direction in DoD policy that has existed since 2011. Starting all the way back in 2011, DoD again and again has said, we send controlled data to defense contractors. They are obligated to protect it. We're never going to ask for proof that it is actually being protected. And again, the warfighter, the taxpayer, the department, the contractors have paid the price for people who are not complying with those controls. So there needs to be a verification mechanism. Now, how you massage that verification mechanism to gradually introduce it in order to get everybody to pass that verification mechanism is a CMMC program policy question. What the requirements are that you're verifying is not within the scope of the verification program. So this RFI that I'm sure we're going to talk about, if you look at the questions on that RFI that we're using to suspend verification, all of the answers to those questions, had they been public comments on the CMMC program rules, would have been dismissed as being out of scope because they're not relevant to the program. So I don't know if the CIO is not aware of that. I don't know if there's some sort of master plan here. I know which one I personally think. But it just doesn't make any sense because by suspending third-party verification completely, what the DoD CIO is saying is there is not a single program in the Pentagon's portfolio where they want third-party verification that these requirements are being implemented. Not a laser on a satellite, not a component on a hypersonic missile, not a stealth component on a jet. You don't have to have everybody getting third-party verification. We know that, but there are no cases in which you want third-party verification. Doesn't make a lick of sense.
Yeah, wow. Well said, Jacob. Ryan, the DOJ civil cyber fraud initiative just like settled cases as recently as last month. What should an MSP actually document this week to protect both themselves and their clients if their score is challenged, a year or two from now?
Yeah. So before all of these changes, we personally witnessed a ton of scenarios where a client of ours would get the letter from DIBCAC and they would communicate to DIBCAC that, hey, listen, we're already on the schedule for a C3PAO this many months from now. And DIBCAC would be like, all right, whatever, loser. And just lose my number. I'm out of here. And they'd move on to, a more eligible target. You don't have that protection anymore. So if I'm an MSP, I don't have that safe space of a C3PAO assessment anymore that might, cause them to move on to something else. So I need to be at a level of readiness to where, now that DIBCAC is using medium confidence assessments or moderate confidence assessments, like you get the call on a Monday, you get assessed on a Friday. So the amount of fresh, up-to-date documentation that I need like at all times is now much more relevant and much more pertinent for your client. And so there's a shift of burden now. If I can't use a C3PAO to just easily show that this is done and do it every 3 years, I need to maintain a higher level of everyday readiness as an MSP. So I better have a strategy to collect X pieces of evidence, every month, every Friday, like whatever you want, whatever unit of measure you come up with, so that I'm maintaining the overall freshness, for lack of a better term, of what's going to be shown, to that DIBCAC assessor, and that I could also demonstrate in real time if asked. So that's a pretty interesting shift.
For sure. Jacob, I'm going to your post just Monday after this one came out. You predicted a wave of future false claim settlements will be traced back to this week.
Oh, yeah.
People treating the news as permission to stop. Play that forward. What does the 2028 settlement press release look like for the contractor back in July 2016?
So like we said, the CMMC verification program is not the requirements. And so when people say, I'm not going to comply with my existing requirements until I find out how verification is going to work, you are ironically the reason why the verification program was created. Now, that can be confusing for normal people, but that's how it works when you sign the contract. We're all, a bunch of us were in the military. We know how contracts work. You know what I'm saying? Especially if you were enlisted. Anyways, so what ends up happening here is since 2020, contractors conducted self-assessments, calculated their own score, and uploaded it into the SPRS database. As long as you had a score, it didn't matter how bad that score was. As long as it was accurate, you were eligible for a contract. With CMMC, that's not the same. You have to pass the criteria at a minimum in order to achieve that status. So now I can't have a negative 200 and be eligible. I must have at least an 88. And we all know what will happen. If you go to your boss and you say, we got a 65, we are not eligible for this contract, what are they going to say? They're going to say, make it an 88. And so whether DIBCAC calls you and finds out, or whether or not the person that you just told to change the score blows the whistle and calls the DOJ themselves, it dramatically increases the risk of liability issues in the future because it's incentivizing the wrong behavior, right? It's just self-assessment with more liability traps for people. Without the cover of hiring Andy and then blaming him if something goes wrong, you are now responsible for making sure that you got everything right in this self-assessment, even if you did do everything correctly, then you didn't mess up. It is exactly the kind of thing that DIBCAC and the DOJ are on the hunt for. It's just not a helpful way to move things forward.
And Jacob, I think it's worth pointing out that how fragile your score becomes when it's not just, oh, we got this one wrong. That must have been one of the ones we didn't take credit for, right? There's ambiguity there. Now, when there's exact numbered requirements that always have to be met, all DIBCAC has to do is walk in and say, this one. Oh, no? Okay. Your whole score is suspect.
If I were DIBCAC, I can tell you exactly what I would do. I would just walk into work every morning and say, hey, ChatGPT, give me a list of all the companies whose POAM closeout windows ended yesterday, and then just call them up and be like, hi, can you send me your documentation? No? All right, click, and then just move on. That's all they got to do. So the real frustration here is that, sure, suspending, extending, making concessions to the industry to get everybody ready is the story of DoD cyber requirements. We've done this over and over again. But when the DoD is not careful about the language that they use to talk about these things, you are conveying a message that allows people's confirmation bias to get them in trouble in the future. DoD CIO ain't going to write a $500,000 check for a small business that puts in the wrong score after they thought the DoD wasn't taking this seriously anymore. It's just awful because years from now, we're going to be talking about this, having to clean up the mess.
Confirmation bias is a key thing to point out there, because ultimately you could make the case that the winners in all this right now are the companies that in 2018 decided not to move on this until they were absolutely forced. And in the last maybe 6 months, we've seen some companies come to the table feeling finally like they're being absolutely forced. They've had a prime say that it's coming. They've said, we've been told by our contract officer they're going to need the C3PAO cert by November. Now they're going to be you could argue, rewarded for taking no action, provided they haven't been compromised in that time, and their bias is confirmed.
Yeah, and it's absolutely not fair to all the contractors that have done what DoD has asked them to do since day one. You have a set of companies that have made the investment, have done the right thing, have been following all of the requirements and doing everything exactly like they should be being done. And Andy, you're exactly right. They're the ones that are going to end up losing in this thing. They have made the investment, and those that didn't are the ones that are going to end up winning.
Yeah, and Scott, I think what I'll do just real quick, I'm going to take a look at this where we asked about the primes.
Yeah, sure. So
let's talk about with you and Scott Singer a little bit because
Scott, so I know that you were mentioning that you had just had some conversations with some primes. What is their feeling? Where are they sitting on this whole thing? Are they like, no, we're going to continue requiring C3PAO assessments to get on our pursuit teams, or are they backing off? Where are they in this whole thing right now?
So it was an interesting discussion that I had today, and they were disappointed by the pause, okay? At least the prime I talked to. And the reason they're disappointed is because it helped them get their supply chain compliant, okay? It was a mandate from the government to get their supply chain compliant. Kind of remember that it's not just CUI, it's their own intellectual property too that's all kind of mingled in here. So it was helping them protect their own information, not just CUI, right? So they plan to keep the same perspective that they want their supply chain to have a third-party assessment. If level 2 certifications go away, at least this prime, I can see them continuing to require that third-party assessment. And they are having conversations with other primes. There's, their peers across, they're talking to each other, right? And there are some similar feelings about this from the other primes. And, think about that maybe the primes are going to lift this whole thing up and keep this going regardless of what the government says, right? Because they know it's the right thing to do.
Wouldn't that be absolutely incredible if giant corporations had taken care of this problem all along and none of us would have ever had to deal with government regulations? Wouldn't that have been amazing? If that's the story of CMMC, that it was like woke everybody up and the Lockheeds and the Boeings of the world were like, you know what? Yeah, we should recycle.
Incredible in the sense that is non-credible.
There's a huge impact to manage here. Like, what happens when the primes get so tired of the will they won't they that they just say, screw it, I want you, supplier, to implement 800-171 for all of my data?
Sure. And something I do want to bring up that they did bring up as a counter argument was there's concern for the mom and pop shops, the 1 and 2, the wife is doing the accounting, the husband's, taking the drawing and, running the CNC machine. And they're concerned that they're making a super important part for them, that this is too much burden. So they do want some happy medium in this whole place that could help kind of support those. And you know what? There was money put in the most recent, funding bill to support this. So it was moving in the right direction.
Right. And, one of the interesting things about it is the Army ENCODE project that was built specifically to do enclaves for those 2 to 10 person organizations, exactly like you're talking about, Scott, that has basically been put on pause because of this. And so the solution has been stopped by the pause to phase 2, which is absolutely the wrong thing that we need to be doing right now.
Just extend phase 1 and then keep doing ENCODE and then adding the money to the mom and pops. But now that you suspended the mechanism that was the catalyst for the funding and the enclaves, no one's going to do the funding or the enclaves. Like, am I taking crazy pills here? You couldn't get it until you had the boogeyman to point at and say, give us the money and the assistance. Now, what are you going to point at?
Yeah.
Well said.
Well, gentlemen, I am going to have to bow out. I have another meeting I have to go jump into that I absolutely cannot miss. I apologize. Great to talk to all of you. Andrew, I'm going to hand over hosting duties to you. Give it back to you since you're the master at this anyway. And we'll talk to all of you soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Scott. Great having you, man. Jacob, this one's for you, bud.
Well, yeah, now my boss is gone, so ask me the real questions.
Well, I'm glad you held back your feelings before,
Yeah, you know me. I always hold them back.
So let's go back in time and you kind of referred to this earlier, but when China compromised the Sea Dragon weapon system, what happened? Why was that a pivotal moment in the CMMC history? And what does Monday's announcement feel like? The DOW has a really bad case of amnesia here.
Yeah, well, the announcement's a massive step backwards. So, like I said, the policy of the DoD since 2011, whether it was in rulemaking form or DoD instruction form, was we're going to send you really sensitive information, sometimes very sensitive information. You're going to protect it. We're never going to ask you for any proof. And the most recent worst case scenario where the United States got burned was a defense contractor with a lot of sensitive, unclassified information on an unclassified contractor network with these longstanding requirements hadn't implemented them. They got compromised by the Chinese Ministry of State Security, who exfiltrated a bunch of data related to a submarine-launched hypersonic anti-ship cruise missile. Does anybody know who has the largest submarine fleet in the world? It's China. You know, a really great way to keep a U.S. carrier strike group from defending Taiwan from being invaded and causing us to lose the war? Have a bunch of submarines with a carrier-killing hypersonic anti-ship cruise missile on top of it. So this was a 5-alarm DEFCON 1 level fire. The DoD IG started going around and kicking doors in, and they were like, oh my God, none of these contractors have implemented any of these cyber requirements. The Senate Armed Services, the House Armed Services committees got wind of this, and they were like, what do you mean you don't ask for proof that cybersecurity is being implemented? What do you mean you've been doing that for 15 years? Come up with a mechanism, their words, for holding contractors accountable for not complying with their existing cybersecurity requirements. Then we ended up with CMMC 1.0, which was obviously an overreaction in the way that it was designed and needed to be refined. However, in that time in 2020, most people were not aware that they had these contractual cybersecurity obligations. So they blamed everything on the CMMC program designed to fix the problem. And we've been stuck in that loop ever since. So now that we finally had an ecosystem after years of bureaucracy and rulemaking and all this stuff that was motivating contractors to get things fixed, that was getting the certifications done, that was exposing people that still wanted to not comply with their existing requirements, the new leadership at the CIO's office was like, no, we're not going to do that anymore. And you're like, oh, really? What changed? Did anything about the threat environment change? You guys can't even get moved over to the most recent NIST cybersecurity baseline because your contractors are so far out of compliance. You're still trying to verify a baseline that came out 10 years ago. The problem is not the verification. The problem is not even close to the verification. We're never going to move on to post-quantum crypto, zero trust implementations. We're never going to do any of the cool, awesome stuff if people can't even just get MFA turned on. And it's been very obvious this whole time that unless you threaten people's contracts, they just don't do it 90% of the time.
Yeah, good job. So, Andy, I'm paraphrasing, but you said the messaging does not sound temporary, and the Reform Task Force, it isn't launched on a whim. If you had to sketch out what emerges in 60 days, what are your thoughts? What happens?
Yeah, again, I think the outcome here is pre-decided.
Oh, really?
What I see, my view of things here is the signals I see are the playbook you would execute if you had an outcome that you wanted to reach. You couldn't just overnight shift everything, but you're going to attack where you can. the first thing that you could probably do if you're in the CIO's office to stymie the progress of CMMC is to suspend any further ground for it to gain before you start dismantling. And now you take that step and then you prime industry with what you're going to try to introduce as your alternative. You're going to attack its weaknesses. And we should be the first to point out on the CMMC side, there are weaknesses to attack. There are things to pick at. And that's what they're going to pick at. They're going to do it disingenuously. They're going to use math that doesn't math when you actually look at the math. And they're going to paint in the broad strokes that are a little sensationalist, but that serves the purpose to undermine confidence in that path forward so you can start to stage your replacement. That's what I expect. I think at the end of 60 days, we're going to get a report of some kind that's going to reflect the implementation costs are too significant, too burdensome for small, medium, and non-traditional companies is the term that the DOW has been referencing over the last several days. And I think they're going to try to pitch an alternative. I don't know how you pull back everything else at the federal level. As we've made the point, like DOD is not really able to operate on its own island when it comes to CUI. This is federal level regulation, but
yeah, I was going to ask, Scott, there's a lot, going a little off topic, but there's a lot of lawmaking that's occurred here. You can you just screw it. Don't worry about it. Like, or where do we go for, if Andy's right, like, can they just go, yeah, repeal that. It went through the OMB. We don't care. Like,
well, I'm not a lawyer, but I play. No, just kidding. Yeah, I mean, if you look back at the 2020 NDAA, it did mandate third-party assessments. I mean, it did say find a way to do them, okay? Because, I mean, we've kind of talked about that already.
Right.
So and it is in law, right? I mean, so it's, I don't know how they're going to weave through this, honestly. And at some point, does Congress start to withhold some funding because they're not following what was requested of them? I don't know. I don't know, is this not a big enough deal for Congress to worry about? Because they've got bigger issues that they're concerned with right now. And, there's a war ongoing right now. And so this could get lost in the mix of things like that. So I don't know what the answer is, and I'm not a lawyer, but I do know there should be a whole bunch of guardrails in place to make sure that this doesn't go too far off.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to you in a second, Jacob. But Ryan, just a thought with what Scott just said. God forbid, tomorrow China has compromised something else, and oh my gosh, this weapon system now. What happens?
Yeah, well, if something like that happens tomorrow, then there's going to be subcommittee hearings, and there's going to be people asking, "What are we doing about this?" So if there's something that happens in the defense industrial base, these are the immediate answers to that question. Well, we have these standards, and we had this program to verify it. Those verifications haven't been done yet. So that's going to be a difficult, river for the DoD to forge, if they're going to try and say that, like, oh, we don't need these things. So, you don't want to have to rely on, another cyber 9/11 for something like this to suddenly snap back into focus. When Scott, when you were talking about, well, how would they walk back on this? How would they change this? It's like a Harry Potter Horcrux situation. Like, the things that need to change live inside of different laws and different federal rules. And the DoD is not the executive agent for all of those.
Right.
So, like, how do you walk back on everything all at once? Like, that would be very difficult to do. NIST is in charge of the standard that's written, not DoD. The CUI executive agent is NARA for the CUI program, not DoD. The FAR Council runs the FAR CUI rule, not DoD. So the one thing that the DoD has direct PMO office control over, which is CMMC, is where we're seeing that change. But, like, how do you somehow corral all of that change to happen all at the same time? And that's where I'm struggling to understand, like, how would you do that inside of one administrative term?
Yeah. So Jacob, you certainly could riff on that, but it just, you mentioned, I'm just going to go to your, what the SBA said. Let me just read it here. Recent
Oh
data.
my God.
Yeah.
I forgot you were going to ask. Okay.
Recent data, including reports from the SBA, confirm that CMMC compliance is forcing innovative companies out of the DIB, which will delay the delivery of critical capabilities to warfighters. And you're brilliant at the basics. Let them eat cyber cake response. Can you unpack this? Well,
first of all, I just want to reiterate, nobody wants lots of companies to leave the DIB. That's not the point of the program, is to make the companies leave the DIB. The big picture here, right, is that if the companies are too small to meet the minimum baseline for this data protection, give them money, right? Every time we sit here and we're like, well, the tiniest one-person company can't do what is arguably a pretty minimum standard outside of a couple things that you might change, then if you keep whittling away the standard to the one-person company, there just won't be a standard to enforce. There has to be a floor at some point. But beyond that, the SBA math is insane. They are out there in their press releases being like, CMMC is costing companies $500,000, $600,000. Even if the price of a CMMC verification assessment hit the mythical $100,000 mark, which 99% of the time it doesn't come anywhere close to that, where is this extra $500,000 or $600,000 coming from to pass your assessment? The answer is it's coming from complying with the existing requirements that were in the contracts for the last 10 years. So inadvertently, the SBA is saying there are so many criminals, we can't enforce the law. There are so many companies out there with huge implementation bills, they can't pass their assessment. Yeah, SBA, that was the point. But instead of advocating for money the way you're supposed to as the small business agency in charge of advocating for them, you're demonizing MFA, you're demonizing turning on logging and monitoring. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Jacob, just if I could add one more point quickly, Andrew.
Yeah.
I mean, I spoke before Congress in 2021 where I exactly said that we need to find money to help small businesses deal with this. I don't, ignore the past problems and they should have been doing this, they should have been doing that. If you want them in, the reality is we got to find a way to support them. Okay. And that's just the reality.
Yeah. Where's the money?
Right. And yeah, I know.
You know what's funny? You brought this up earlier, Scott. I think, other Scott was talking about this too. This $1.15 trillion defense budget that they want to pass, the provision in the Senate version of that budget is to provide like $50 million worth of assistance. Do you know that is 0.004% of the total budget that they want to authorize? If the proposed budget was the distance between where I'm standing right now in Los Angeles to New York City, the amount of money that they propose to give to help with the cost of assessment is the equivalent of me walking 26 feet into that parking lot right there. It's insane. We know they need the money. They've asked DOD to help small businesses every year in the NDAA since they told the DOD to go make sure that companies are complying with these requirements. There are just only so many things you can do at changing the requirements, giving more time, letting people self-assess before you're like, if you don't give them the money, they're not going to do it.
Yeah, good stuff. Ryan, something that an MSP is going to deal with out there listening right now. Monday morning, pause the project. You get the phone call. Pause the project, Ryan. Redirect the budget. We'll invest. We'll revisit after this whole thing blows over in 60 days. But so you get that phone call. Can you give us your best, 60-second response that could help MSPs when they get that call, how to, best, handle it and do the right thing for the client?
If I was an MSP, I would say, I'm glad we got this breathing room. This is a gift. I would take the opportunity of this pause to prepare for some other things that are still barreling towards us, right? Maybe we should take an opportunity here to get ready to transition to 800-171 Rev 3, which is going to be required under the FAR CUI rule. Maybe we need to take this opportunity to reinvest in evidence collection so that, I can actually stand and deliver if I get that call from DIBCAC on Monday. There are things that we should be doing now with this extra time that we've had that are going to serve us in the future. And so I think that, organizations need to see all of these different things that are slowly stacking up, that are still objects in motion, right? The FAR CUI rule, is definitely a big element of that. But, you've also got lots of executive orders going out saying, like, we're going to force contractors to adopt post-quantum cryptography.
Yeah.
Like, that will soon be its own contract clause. That will soon be its own set of requirements. We're going to launch new extensive vulnerability management programs, and we're going to partner with industry on that. Okay, so I know we've got a lot of technical debt. Have we ever run a vulnerability scan? Like, things are coming that we actually need to get ahead of. Let's use this opportunity to do that. So, that would be my encouragement to organizations, is to look at RegInfo, look at the Federal Register, look at all these things that are already being announced, look at executive orders from the White House, and realize that we've had an absolute landfall of executive orders on cyber topics. In the last 2 weeks, we've had a lot of things announced for rulemaking in the last month that are all headed our way, and we need to do something about that.
Let me just ask the group. I know we're right at the hour mark. How are you guys? Do you have a few more minutes? Scott, starting with you. You guys okay for a few more questions? Yep. Okay. So Scott, it was interesting, kind of maybe segueing for what Ryan just said. For those whose SPRS scores are, let's say, aspirational, because they assumed, a C3, like yourself, I've been through kind of a mock assessment with you, listen to you. You're phenomenal. You're encouraging. You don't want people to fail. You're there to help them. Andy, the same. So how urgent, is the rescore conversation? And, without triggering panic or, I want to make, I got to believe, these people, like Jacob said before, hey, I got to get a score in. That hasn't changed, right? I still got to self-assess. That hasn't changed. Is it?
It's very urgent. Okay, because now we're running into the space, as Jacob was talking about, right? We're running into the space where, it's level 2 self-assess, right? November 10th, that's in contracts, and you put a false score in there, you can get in a lot of trouble. False Claims Act, right? So some of the things that I would recommend, if you do figure out you have the wrong score posted in SPRS' supplier performance risk system, the system where you have to go in to post the score, and it's a government system, right? That's why they can come after you for false claims. So I would recommend that you go back, look what happened, figure it out. I often tell my clients, they have an AS9100 quality system, their ISO 9001, whatever the case is, use their quality system. I think, open a corrective action. So you've got a document chain to kind of show what happened, right? Explain why you posted the incorrect score, right? Hopefully it's you didn't know, right? You made a mistake, right? How did you discover that you posted the score? Hopefully it's because you hired somebody that knows how this works, and they came in and they did a gap assessment and they said, hey, your score is really bad, and that's how you found it, right? And then what are you going to do to fix it? Well, we went in and we posted the right score. And then, okay, how are you going to make sure it's not going to happen again, right? Preventative actions. And that, to me, is the right way to go about this, because then you don't have to really be too concerned with looking in the rearview mirror, right? It's like, I made a mistake. I went and fixed it, and I documented what happened.
Well, it's almost like the IRS, right? The IRS on the margin, Scott, is, for people that have been audited, on the margin is cool. Like, as long as you're like, I screwed up. Here's, let me fix it. On the margin, as long as you're transparent with the federal government, they're pretty good, to work with. It's when you're not, you got issues.
Yeah, and Andrew, the other problem here also is if you have emails in your email system that show that somebody knows now that the score is wrong, okay, that's discoverable, right? And that discovery could show that you knew there was a problem and then you didn't go do something about it, right? So just fix it.
Yeah, good stuff. Andy, what I want to do is I'm going to ask you this question. I'll round off with this question and then see what questions come in from the audience. I also am going to let everybody know about a legal thing that Eric Tildes is going, a legal kind of Ask Me Anything. Ryan, I think your team contributed a little bit to this.
You're all under arrest. The cops are at the door.
But again, everybody out there, I know you had some great questions along the way. If you had one that you're like burning to ask, can you just copy it, resend it on in? Andy, this is one that I think MSPs can probably relate to, including yourself. You built an incredible company. The money question, right? MSPs built practices, staff, revenue projections for, this November deadline. And now how should an MSP consider restructuring? With this CMMC service line, potentially changing, like what's your advice? What's your advice to yourself and to others out there that are staffing up? Maybe they're I know several MSPs going through preparing for their level 2. Hey, that's the right thing to do, et cetera, et cetera. Love your thoughts on this.
Yeah. So the question is, if you were already preparing toward like your level 2 as an MSP, you were moving down this track, you were making the moves to restructure to support a DIB company. Do we keep on keeping on? Do we change course? Ultimately, I would say the bulk of what you're required to do to achieve level 2 is good security. It's good practice. There is stuff on the margins that in the community we've been debating for the last 8 years of what's good and what's not, but the bulk is good. And I think your largest liability as an MSP still remains being the source of a compromise. I think giving bad advice and causing someone to be non-compliant is a liability you should be also careful of. But being the source of compromise and not following general good security best practices and being the reason a customer gets compromised is probably your largest liability and remains that. So don't slow down doing what you would need to do to become level 2 compliant just because DOW has paused one piece of the puzzle. The best way, I think, still to support the DIB, even though they may not be required to get a C3PAO certification, is for you still to get your C3PAO certification, or at least have a C3PAO come in and do an independent evaluation if you don't want to pay for the full cert structure. You should want the assurance that a third-party independent assessor provides on the maturity and implementation of security controls in your organization. Nothing will move your team and nothing will move resources like knowing someone's coming in to check your homework. I say that as somebody who is a perennial procrastinator, have been all my life, haven't studied as hard as I have the hour before the test. Yeah. And that's attributed a lot of passing of tests have been because, hey, the test was on the calendar. And if there's no test on the calendar, I've found it's very easy to say, not today,
That's very fair. So let me just quick word for everybody. So there's a gentleman named Eric Tildes. You can look him up on LinkedIn. He worked with probably north of 500 MSPs as a fractional legal counsel, works with a lot of folks in the DIB. One of the things I tasked him to do is to chat with folks like Ryan Bonner and others about, how you firmed up your contracts really need to be now. It's one thing if you're an MSP and Scott's in there doing the assessment and he's the one, quote unquote, grading the homework. It's another one now when you have a shared responsibility model, you're, helping your client through things. And the analogy real quick, if I could give it maybe I'll give this to Jacob. It's like back in 2020 when, the cyber insurance questionnaires really started getting much more rigorous. And the client comes to you, Jacob, and says, hey, man, can you help me fill this out and submit it? Well, if your contracts, your scopes of work didn't say, hey, part of our service is reviewing your cyber insurance, helping you fill out your information, yada, 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 your limitations of liability just went out the window. And that's a very bad day for you. God forbid something happens and the client turns back for you. And so I could see a lot of that analogistic stuff going on here as MSPs try to help. Oh, I've got a CC, I got a CCA on staff, I got a CCP, we can help, we can do this. Does that make sense to you? And B, that, so we're going to be doing a cyber call on this. There'll be a blog. And by the way, if you want that blog and that information, I'm going to put in here, just sign up at community@writeaboom.com. But does that hold water for you, Jacob?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thread that you're on there, and maybe what Eric might support the idea too. I haven't talked to him about it, but we're all out here as MSPs having a grand old time, because even though we're connected to every critical infrastructure sector, we ourselves are not considered a critical infrastructure sector. We are not recognized as a regulated industry, even though we service the majority of these small businesses in regulated industries. So a really, really great way to have MSPs be recognized and then regulated is for everybody to not lead the way on security of our own volition. Because as you can imagine, getting regulated is not fun. It's very clunky, and the music would stop at that point, because then all of a sudden you're getting dictated what you need to do. The MSP industry we would all benefit from coming together like the credit card companies did on PCI and being like, we're going to preemptively tell everybody what the standard is so that we don't get told what the standard is, because it's only a matter of time. So
let's go to some questions here. So Brandon said, let me start with you, Scott. Is there some type of FedRAMP 20X that could come to CMMC that automates, or 20 times that could come to CMMC that automates and accelerates some of this?
Sure. I mean, so we're a 3PAO too. So 20X is, I think it's a pretty cool program. However, I don't think it's going to solve all the problems with this, assessment program, but from a continuous kind of compliance perspective, that whole 20X model is very useful. It could be something good.
Dude, I wanted to talk about this question and I saw it in chat. I'll tell you what, stick with me, everybody. We're going to geek out for just a second. The standard for controls in federal environments is in NIST SP 853. The derivative of that is NIST SP 800-171. DISA has been running automated compliance checks through what they call STIGs against bigger and more complicated cybersecurity controls since I was in freaking middle school, right? You can absolutely run automated checks using the same technology that they've had for decades against a smaller derivative set of requirements. So now, if the problem is the price of the assessments, sorry, Scott, sorry, Andy, then just spin up 100,000 AI agents and let's run out and do the automated assessments against everything that can be automated tomorrow. Because the problem isn't contractor readiness, right? The problem is the third-party verification. So let's not worry about the third-party verification part. Let's just automate it. But we all know that the problem is not how fast the assessments can run, because assessment capacity was never the problem in the first place. We could automate this thing tomorrow if they wanted to, solve 75% of what gets asked during an assessment to be reviewed by a C3PAO or reviewed by DIBCAC or whoever. Those tools exist. They only have to use them. But that's probably not what they're going to do, even though I can't wait to see what this review says, because when they came up with these rules, we didn't have AI agents. Like, we didn't have all these cool clankers running around that can do all this grunt work for us 24/7. Let's do it tomorrow. Let's do it tomorrow, because what that's going to do is it's going to expose the fact that the implementations weren't done. So ironically, now that we have the ability to automate it probably easier than ever, they're not going to do it because they'll expose everybody.
Yeah, coming from an administration that paused certain AI rollouts because it could show you too many security vulnerabilities too quickly. That the same risk exists here.
Well, thank goodness we don't have that in the OT portion of the,
Oh my God. I'm sorry. I got to interject. The brilliant on the basics thing where they're talking about, just do these 10 IT security controls and also do these 10 OT security controls. Where is that in the contract? You guys purposefully scoped operational technology out of CMC assessments to make it easier on businesses and manufacturers in the DIB. So your scoping guidance said, don't worry about OT. And now all of a sudden you're like, what's a really good idea? OT security. What are we doing here?
So Matt Bates says, let's go to Andy. Andy, how do we expect AOs and the warfighters to react to this? Do we think there's any possibility that it will start causing things that were previously CUI to suddenly start being classified instead to ensure it's appropriately protected?
That's a loaded question. Given that the majority of the CUI I seem to see is, just every email the DoD sends, whether it's to say, hello, happy birthday, my friend, or to send you some major print for something. I don't think there's a whole lot of calculus being applied here to appropriate handling of CUI. Somebody asked at the top of this, is it the wrong question to say that maybe they just don't care about the confidentiality of CUI? I think that's an appropriate question to ask.
Yeah.
Anecdotally, I've heard that this CIO is fairly dismissive of data confidentiality concerns and is far more interested in things like availability and resilience. She has made public comment to that effect, and I've heard similar sentiment that she's expressed where, there's that thought of like, China already has it all anyway, so what are we doing here? I'm not the one saying that, to be clear.
Yeah.
But that is a perspective I have heard shared.
It looks like Jacob's in full agreement. Jacob?
Yeah, I just can't wait for the hearings. I'm like, all these things that you're telling reporters. I mean, the idea that the sitting undersecretary for acquisition and sustainment would go out in press releases and interviews and say that the verification program to keep sensitive DoD information confidential is nothing more than meaningless red tape and, his words, peacetime paperwork, when it's the direct result of an act of cyber war against DoD weapon systems, is something that I cannot wait to hear him say to the faces of the people in the Armed Services Committee, because I don't like leaving Southern California very much, but when that hearing gets scheduled, I am flying up there and putting on a suit and sitting right in the front row behind these people, because I'm like, you can say that to the press all you want to. You can say that to the people who just don't like proving that they're doing cybersecurity. Please say it to the people who wrote the statute after we got absolutely smashed on the Sea Dragon program. Did you guys see the SBA Twitter response to this? This was just the most surreal thing ever. SBA really retweeted the announcement that it was suspended, and they created an AI slop video of an M1 Abrams tank blowing up a giant sign that says bureaucracy on it. The irony of them making a video of a weapon system whose critical data flowing in the supply chain you absolutely would want to have assurance is being confidential, would be used to then blow up an effigy of the program to give you assurance, is the dumbest thing that I have ever seen in this space.
Yeah, wow. Brian, is it a bad idea for companies to continue the application process to apply for the C3PO as we stand today?
The decision to become a C3PO has got to be a well-informed business decision. You have to read what the market looks like, the total addressable market, the total serviceable market. What's your pro forma? So from that perspective, like I think that, to Jacob's point, we have excess assessor capacity right now. We have excess C3PAO capacity. I wouldn't try to move into a market right now if I've got potentially too many people already trying to vie for that business. And I do think that there will probably be some consolidation there. I think that C3PAOs will need to succeed on the strength of their process or their ability to specialize for certain types of assessments. And so the people who are already in the space who have critical mass are probably going to be able to do that on a certain level more effectively. So from that perspective, I wouldn't be starting a C3PAO tomorrow. But as far as who's the beneficiary of a C3PAO assessment, it's kind of crazy that, like, with all this stuff happening, like suddenly, like, the people who could benefit the most from a C3PAO L2 assessment would probably be MSPs.
Yeah.
Because you can't get DIBCAC to come give you a free assessment. You're not eligible. So if you want to prove to people that you actually can do the things that you are going to make them do, like, that would actually be a really good vote of confidence. So,
but Ryan, I'll just tell them that I'm doing it. Won't they believe me? Why do I need proof? I told you I'm doing it.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like people buying a certain thing want to know that you're able to do it. It's strange.
I think we're on to something here.
Let's close out with this. David Studdard says, do we envision an outcome where the DOW drops C3PAO assessments completely in favor of enforcement via random DIBCAC checks?
That was this close to random urine samples, but
yeah.
Like,
Andy, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll go back to, I mean, I may be so off base, and I reserve the right to ask Andrew to delete this video in future to cover my tracks. But the signal to me is, yeah, they are pushing to eliminate C3PAO assessments, or at least at the scale that would currently be rolled out, you know, where it's everyone that touches CUI essentially is going to end up with it. Maybe they want to go to some sort of selection process. They've created this definition of small, medium, and non-traditional business as like the target of what they're trying to reduce. So maybe they'll say, hey, C3PAOs will be for contracts over a certain size or contractors over a certain size, and everyone else, it's the looming threat of DIBCAC. I don't know, but here's the thing. It's either all very well planned or it's very much not. I don't think there's much of a middle ground here.
It's Hanlon's razor, everybody. It's Hanlon's razor.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that you're going to have these situations where individual agencies, individual program offices, government entities, like, the need to verify things and to assess contractors, that won't go away, right? Slap a different name on it, give it a different program title, whatever. There's always going to be scenarios where, all of these dollars being allocated, don't, need to be verified, and that the contractors doing the work need to be verified. So you're still going to see agencies spinning up their own verification efforts. You're still going to see program offices asking for more information. You're still going to see contracts officers calling DIBCAC and ordering assessments for someone they'd like to assign a contract to. Those things will still continue to happen. So whether we see a new rebranded version of this, there's always going to be a need for organizations who can step in and do that. I would not be surprised if several C3PAOs in the next 12 months are given government contracts to do assessments, and the government pays for them.
Holy crap. What an idea. Dude, that's a crazy idea. It's not like we've done that with every other kind of assessment that the government has done for 30 years. Ryan, you got to let somebody know about this idea, man. It's funny about the DIBCAC thing because, yeah, sure, get DIBCAC to do it. Do it for free. Get the clankers to do it. Do it for free. You're going to have to, at some point, provide assurance at some level that you're doing the things that you're claiming when the government really cares about the thing that you're working on. It doesn't matter if you're a one-person shop. It doesn't matter if you're a 1,000-person shop. But this whole suspension of the assurance mechanism and then demonizing the idea of assurance is going to just cause more problems, because that's the wrong thing to blame. They're not searching out ways to fix this issue by making it free, make DibCAC do it, do this, do that. They're certainly not going through the difficult work of, I don't know, identifying the data you actually care about instead of just shotgunning out the requirement to every single person everywhere because it's easier for you, and then blaming everybody who wants to help fix the problem like we're the actual issue. Sure, make DibCAC do it, but they already said they can't hire enough people in the government, especially after the beginning of last year. Y'all remember that? What were we going to do? Hire 3,000 people to be government employees and then fire all of them? There's a reason why they did this thing in terms of the private sector to do it. It's going to take a subtle, elegant, complex policy solution. And if the people in charge just blame everything that they don't like or is not immediately apparent how you fix it as icky bureaucracy, then we're just going to keep going around in this circle while the liability for contractors goes through the roof.
Yeah, well said. Well said. And like I said, Jacob, the last thing we want is, some large scale compromise, but we're in essence opening the door back up for that right away.
I'll tell you what, man. I mean, this will kind of close some threads. If anybody's interested, shoot me a message on LinkedIn, or maybe we can have another call about this. I'll tell you exactly the policy lever that they can pull to use their existing tools and fix this problem. The policy issue back in 2016 was they said the requirements go in all contracts by default, whether or not we send you the data to trigger those requirements. Lots of people never had the data, but they had this ticking time bomb in their contract that they said, yeah, we're doing that. So then years later, people go, can you prove it? And they go, no, well, we never had the data, which you can't prove. So then you get screwed. They need to change the policy around DFARS 7012 to say, we will only include this clause when we include the data. You know how to tell when they include the data? The standard form that's coming with the FAR CUI rule. That's not a CMMC problem. That's not a DoD CIO problem. That's the Undersecretary for Acquisition and Sustainment over here talking about paperwork and red tape. Guess what, buddy? You got to do the paperwork to tell people if they have the data or not. You got to embrace the bureaucracy to fix the bureaucracy. You can't just keep doing this thing where you think that Chesterton's fence is there for no reason.
Okay. So I put so Jacob, Ryan, Andy, thanks a million. Obviously to Scott Edwards, Scott Singer, all of you out there listening, thank you for sitting in and giving us this opportunity to unpack this a bit. I put Jacob's, Ryan, and Andy's LinkedIn in. Follow their work. It's awesome. Again, I will put in the Write a Boom community link if you want to attend this Ask the Experts with Eric Tildes, Ryan, and some others on the legal side of this, and really making sure you're buttoned up if you still plan on being part of this and getting, obviously making sure your submissions and work are correctly with your customers. I highly encourage you to join, and we'll make sure that you get the blog, attend the Ask the Experts session. With that, again, gentlemen, thanks a million for doing this on such short notice. Thank you all for giving us the opportunity to sit with you all today.
If you're in the Write a Boom community but not in our Discord yet, you're missing where the real conversation happens. Join community.writeaboom.com to access cybercall discussions, upcoming CTFs, boom camps, and early access to what's coming next. If you want to stay close to what's actually happening in the MSP security space, I'll see you there.